Welcome to the Empowered Money Girl, where we break down the barriers to financial confidence, celebrate women's wins, and reveal the secrets to living boldly and well. I'm your host, Josette Mandela. What if building a successful business could also build a better planet? My guest today is living proof. Anna Hammond is the founder and CEO of Matriarch Foods, an environmental impact company creating a circular food future where nothing goes to waste. Matriarch partners with large vegetable manufacturers and regional farmers to upcycle surplus and byproducts into healthy, low-sodium, shelf-stable foods for schools, hospitals, retail, and food banks. The result? Less food waste in landfills, more money for farmers, and greater access to nutrition for everyone. Since launching in 2019, Matriarch has grown to supply the nation's largest food service operations, with products now on shelves at Whole Foods and Fresh Direct, and in 2023 launched the first carbon-neutral healthy meal for food banks through the Feeding America National Marketplace. If you're ready to see what's possible when business and purpose align, you will love this episode. Please welcome the visionary, value-driven, and change-making Anna Hammond.
Thank you. Hi, good morning.
So Anna, can you take us back to the beginning? What was your path like to where you are today?
Well, I guess I kind of have a pretty wandery path, although I always see the through line for it. And, when I graduated from college, these many years ago, there were sort of two ways you could go. One was the nonprofit world and one was the business world. And for me, the value proposition of the nonprofit world was much more compelling. So I spent, the first 25 years of my working career working in the nonprofit world, in museums, actually. And after that, I decided to launch into sort of a different arena because I did not want to become a museum director. And so I got a job as a speechwriter for a politician. And at the time, and I think this group is still going, there was a group in New York sort of cultivating women for political office. And she was very interested in cultivating me in that way. So I spent a year as her speechwriter, and then also got involved with a group of farmers that she had wanted to support, who were looking to turn county land into farms to grow food for the community. And so I stayed on to work on that project, and we ultimately founded the Rockland Farm Alliance, and that group now has 3 working farms in Rockland County. And during the course of that work, I just really started to learn about, more. I mean, obviously I knew, but sort of more in depth about the plight of farmers, how challenging it was to get product to market. And then simultaneously, I got offered a job to build a kind of farm to table program for young people in New York City. And the person who founded that happened to also have the largest catering company in New York City. And so I saw a huge opportunity to work with her, and sort of fill out, I guess, her vision for bringing kids, into the natural world and to better quality eating. And so after about 6 years of working with her, that program became a healthy eating program for youth and families living in public housing in New York City. And so part of that program was brokering relationships with farmers to donate their surplus vegetables into those classes because most of public housing is technically in food deserts in New York City. And again, sort of during that process, saw, how much extra produce they had, for all kinds of reasons, harvested, unsold, things that were left on the farm, challenges of supply chain and cold chain and storage. And also, maybe most importantly, really for them, the need to expand their markets so that they would get paid for their work. And then, of course, the need for healthier food that all people have. And so, with those three challenges, and I guess the third one, which I didn't mention, was that all the data on the negative impacts that food loss has on global warming, I saw an opportunity to solve three issues simultaneously with a business. And with this background I have of nonprofit work, which is actually all the skills you need for a startup. You have to stay lean, you have to report to a board, you have to know how much you're spending on Kleenex. And so that was really the background, the reason, and the sort of compelling value proposition for launching Matriarch Foods. I think you're on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was coughing. So, I mean, what a story. That's amazing to to take that nonprofit background, end up in politics for a short while, and then through that association, find out about the farms and realize that there was definitely a need here at getting that supply chain going to and be able to feed people with surplus, that there was so many different ways of food just going to waste because either the farmers couldn't get it where it needed to go or didn't know where to send it. That's quite a story there.
I mean, I think there's so many places where food systems have challenges, but also solutions. And, if you go back 70 years and look at getting people off the farm and industrial food production and the fact that at the time, I mean, before, before whatever 1940, there wasn't a really fantastic like system of roads in this country. That people were really trying to solve for those bigger issues, transportation, education, access to, different kinds of lives. And also, as importantly, like getting food to people in rural areas, not just urban. And so, I always like to say that we're creating new efficiencies of the inefficiencies of former efficiencies, and really kind of cleaning up the supply chain and working toward, I guess what's really called the ag of the middle now, which is, regional farmers, regional processing, food loss reduction, and manufacturing. So, every time we're working on one thing, we're sort of also pushing the next thing to be solved. And I think that's, one of the reasons we've had so much success and in bringing our idea to market and bringing our products to market is that it makes sense and it solves numerous problems and also creates an opportunity for more problems to be solved. And I think solutions-based businesses right now are ever more important.
Yeah, and especially like you say, the food shortages, you hear about it pretty much all over the world. So you're coming up with solutions and showing how it's possible to take what does exist already and do a better job with what's there rather than wasting that food, finding ways of packaging it and processing it, making it stable so that you could take it other places.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. And in fact, we just got a big order for product to go to Jamaica right now for the hurricane season. So even though, most of our work happens in the US, we are starting to work with organizations that are sending food to other places. And, with all the cuts to USDA right now, I think that's, that creates another opportunity for US farmers to have their products bought and put into market in different ways.
And that is an interesting point, is that relying on politicians to do the right thing doesn't seem like a good business strategy.
Unfortunately, right now, probably not. Although I think that we have to continue to create those pathways for when people do start working together again in a better way. And I do believe that will happen. History shows us that it will, even if there are massive bumps. And I would call this one is more than a bump for sure. Maybe it's more like an earthquake, but I don't know. I guess ever positive. I think sometimes disasters bring people together and force people to think about ways of working together better. And I hope that we're in that moment right now.
Agreed. So at what point did you decide that I want to I want to lead at a higher level, that the nonprofit and working with the politician, this is interesting, but it's my turn to really step out and actually create this business that you've created.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so many good things happen in the nonprofit world, in terms of the people who are doing the work. There are just millions of nonprofit organizations in the United States that do amazing work and serve communities in ways that, otherwise wouldn't happen. But part of that is because our government doesn't work for the people in the way that it should. And so we need those nonprofits to do that work. Additionally, however, a lot of those nonprofits are supported by private individuals. And what that means is that private individuals are deciding what can or cannot be done for the general population, really. And that is not a truly equitable way to have anything done. So I think I realized at a certain point that while, I was very good at what I did and I was very good at raising money for what I did, that something that needed to happen from both an environmental perspective and a health perspective and a financial perspective was probably best served through a business. And I think the difference is that now there are, a values-driven business is sort of become a normal thing. It's not as normal as it should be, and I think all businesses should be values-driven, but it is a thing now that people care about, and especially young people who are inheriting this world. So, it's just the right time, sort of right people, right challenge to solve. And it's exciting. There's a lot happening in terms of food systems transformation, and I think that our business is one of many solutions, and it's just taken hold because it makes sense. It's using it's using all the energy and water that otherwise would go to waste. It's feeding people, it's paying farmers, and for businesses also, they're getting money back on money they've already spent, either on purchasing vegetables to be cut for grocery, et cetera, or, from a farmer perspective, purchasing seed, planting, fertilizing, watering, harvesting, and then all that work goes, just sits in a warehouse. If they can't sell it. And so then, maybe they donate it, but vegetables are volatile, you can't hold them that long. So, our solution really comes in early in the supply chain and solves for all those issues.
And like you say, a lot of vegetables, my understanding is that there's a lot of places where they're very specific about it's got to be perfect. So then there's all those vegetables that are less than perfect that are just sitting there and suddenly become landfill. And you're
Yeah,
taking
I
care
mean,
of that.
there is that, and I think, I mean, it's partly consumer education that needs to happen around, what's perfect, what's not. But also, if you think about the way that the system is set up, when you go to a grocery store and you see those cardboard flats that have little dips in them, those dips are all the same size. And they're all the same size because when you stack them, that's the best way to preserve the fruit or the vegetable. And so that is just not the way that nature works at all. And I always say, like, if you've ever grown a tomato plant, like, you don't have to imagine this at any other, at any other scale. But if you've ever grown a tomato plant in your apartment or in your garden, you know that every single tomato on that plant is a different size. Maybe there are like three or four that are sort of the same. And you could take those three or four and fit them into that, cardboard flat to preserve them. Everything else wouldn't work. So, part of it is nature and part of it's the way that we've designed to preserve nature in a way that is not the way that nature works. So some of it is just, there is going to be a time. I mean, I sometimes think, oh, what's the next, what's the next thing for us? I think I would probably design transportation packaging to be more flexible so that you could ship apples of a million different sizes in those pockets, and there would be various sizes, or those pockets would expand or contract to fit the size of the fruit or vegetable. But yeah, some of it is design and some of it is just, the way that nature works, and we need more manufacturing and more products that take that in.
Agreed, because like you say, it's sad when you go to the store and you find things and you're like, "Ooh, what happened to this thing?" Or the because like you say, because the packaging is all the same, you find a lot of fruits that are damaged from just being too close to each other in those
Yeah.
packages. So, how would you define financial independence? You were talking a bit about, business versus nonprofit and the different ways that you look at money.
I mean, financial independence personally or in terms of the business?
Either.
Well, I mean, financial independence personally is having enough to, pay for housing, food, and, the essentials of life. So there's that. And then financial independence from a business perspective is, I think you can think about it two ways. I mean, I think a lot of times people start businesses and they're like, we need to raise a lot of money and, then we can have the freedom to do whatever we want. But that's not really true, because if you raise a lot of money, the people who've given you that money, have a say in what you're doing. So not a lot of freedom there. But there is a fine balance. And I think, we've struck that to some extent where, you raise enough to get off the ground, and then you need to be laser focused on making your business profitable. Because if it's not profitable, then you're not going to be able to solve the issues that you set out to solve. A business is successful through sales. you know I mean, yes, you could say if something failed, like, you brought an idea out there and someone else will take it up, but like in the long term, the business of business is business, and was as a friend of mine likes to say. So, I think that that's true. And financial independence comes with, making enough that you can pay yourself and your team a good amount of money, and then put enough back into that business that you can grow to the next stage. But we have also, as a values-driven business, we have only sought out impact investors. So groups and individuals who really understand that it takes a long time to solve certain kinds of issues. Food is very slow, margins are small. It's, even if you're trying to solve for a value or, a challenge in the system, you also are doing the same thing that any food business has to do, which is, create a great brand, get your products to market, deal with distribution, competition, all those things. So, I think financial independence is really getting to the point where you can sustain and grow without having to take too much more investment on. And food is different from tech, obviously. There you could invest in 20 tech companies and have one major win, or you could invest in 20 food companies and have in aggregate wins across that. which one is going to make people's lives better, I would I would vote for the food one. But it's not necessarily how people think about their investments generally.
And yeah, I agree that that tech is the hot thing, whereas food is like, oh, that's so yesterday. But it's really not, because when you look at the statistics that I'm sure that the number of people living at or below the poverty line that really need the kind of products and services that you're coming up with to make food affordable and to get more of it available, even in a form that people can use, is to me an amazing impact to be making.
Well, yeah, and I mean, food is an everyday. I mean, it's not yesterday, it's not tomorrow, it's need it today or won't survive till tomorrow. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's very compelling.
And more importantly, that food can be grown in certain locations, but not necessarily all locations where people are living. So being
Correct.
able to find ways to transport the food, to be able to use what's excess in one place and move it to another place. That's and coming up with a solution that's nutritious, that people enjoy eating, that um, takes into account things like low sodium, so that they're not um, causing themselves other issues by eating this surplus food, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many reasons why why preserving food is important. And I think currently there's a bit of a rap on ultra processed food and a misunderstanding of what that means. Anything that you're cooking and putting in a jar or a carton is technically ultra processed. But what you use to make that recipe, is really where the harms can happen. So if there's too much salt, or if there are too many gums, or there, just other preservatives that aren't healthy, not most of that is not necessary when you preserve food. And if you think about, I don't know, how many people in your audience had grandparents who preserve food and, canned canned vegetables, canned fruit. They weren't adding tons of salt to do that in jars. Sure, there's salt cod, and if you look back, on food preservation, you see salt is a major thing, but not when you preserve the food with heat. So that's much more sort of in the drying process. And I think that we've just gotten so far away from making processed food that's healthy. People have forgotten that it can be. And so, for example, all of our products are low sodium. And we do that for a couple reasons. One, first and foremost, because it's healthier, but also to show people that it's possible to, make food without a lot of salt. And so we have a lot of success in the healthcare industry, chefs who want to use ingredients that are more vegetables, but also low sodium.
Yeah, and I agree. And having family history of heart disease, that's something that I try to stay away from. And yet, like you say, if you look at processed foods, prepackaged, easy, that you go into the frozen food section and you grab something that's quick and easy. Well, you flip the box over and you're looking at a day's supply of sodium in one serving. And
Yeah.
then it's like, okay, so what am I supposed to have the rest of the day?
Well, too, I think people have forgotten that there's so many ways to bring flavor to food that don't involve salt.
Right.
We have one product that we make for food banks and disaster relief, and it is a quarter of the salt of a comparable product. And the one complaint we always get, everyone's like, "Oh, vegetables, beans, amazing, amazing," but it's like it needs more salt, and it's like, yes, you can add more salt yourself, or you can get a little hot sauce
Mhm.
and add that, or some herbs to sprinkle on it. So I think that part of it is just getting people back into thinking about different kinds of ways to get that impact. And, unfortunately, so much of food that is distributed, particularly to food banks and also low cost food has a lot of salt because that packs a quick flavor. It's a quick response. A lot of that food has also been designed to make you want more of it. And billions of dollars have been spent, making that food craveable. And so, it's like there's this big thing in sort of food systems change now where it's like it needs to be delicious. It's like, yeah, obviously, like that's sort of tacit. All food, you want people to want the food, but part of it is training people's palates to enjoy things that have maybe more subtle flavors. And that unfortunately tends to happen, by repetition. And people who don't have a lot of money can't afford just to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to feed my kid broccoli like 15 times it takes them to actually like it, which is pretty much how long it takes anyone to try something that maybe at first they don't like to eventually like get that flavor as part of their enjoyment. So, that's where all the work that's happening that's so amazing in like school food programs, for example. Always like to point out the Chef Ann Foundation because I think that their work is so amazing. And, they're really working on getting more scratch food, scratch cooked food or quick scratch cooked food into the public schools and to get kids and also to have the education around it. So you get kids to sort of realize that there's a world of flavors out there that aren't going to give you immediate gratification necessarily. They're not going to be like your phone app, They're
Yeah.
not going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to get that ding immediately. But that, you will over time learn to really enjoy them because they do actually taste really good. Sort of have to learn how to appreciate that, kind of like anything. So, there's a lot of great work being done out there to shift people's palates, to reduce food waste, to make lives better for farmers. And I have a lot of hope that over the next decade, that the transformation is now unstoppable. And I think, in 10 years from now, we'll look back and think, oh, it seems so hard, and now it's just normal.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. And I agree that um we really do need to people to start looking at the the foods that they're eating and why am I eating so much salt and sugar? Because neither one of those are particularly good for you. And like you say, back when my grandparents were growing up, salt was prevalent, but the sugar was actually still pretty expensive. So you didn't use a lot of sugar. And
Yeah.
yet today we have childhood diabetes, which has become an epidemic. And why? Because we're pushing salt and sugar now because sugar is kind of cheap.
Yeah, and that's a part of why these challenges are hard to solve from a business perspective because a quick hit of something is much more satisfying than having to take time to enjoy it or you know whatever. But I think that it's quick partly because people are trying to make a lot of money. It's cheap to make that food. It delivers a quick impact. So yeah, it's a process of transitioning all of this, but I do think it's happening.
So, what advice would you have for women who are looking to build financial independence, especially if they've relied on a partner in the past?
I mean, I think it's, education and skill building are key. And, that would be another place I would spend my time if I weren't building this business. Education is just everything. And if you can learn a skill, and I'm not saying you have to go to college, it's just like learning a skill, whatever it is that you can be paid for and paid for increasingly well is going to create that independence. And if you don't know how to do different kinds of things, you don't have very much choice. And so, STEM and STEAM, which I think, STEAM is great actually because the arts are a little bit of an unsung hero in terms of creativity and getting your skills to be, um, to have more value, are just such important parts of our educational system that need to have more focus, and particularly for women and underserved populations. Um, yeah, education is everything, really, And of course, your environment and what your parents do and how you're encouraged as a child, all, early childhood education, also huge. And I see this, obviously I saw this with my own children, but I really see it with my grandchildren now because I'm not in the maw of the day to day, like, how am I going to get them out of the house and get to work and all of that? But sort of as I see my kids raising their kids, how much time they spend explaining things and giving them chances to figure things out. And, they are very involved in their educations. And they, aren't all in public school. So it's not like, oh, this is a privileged environment at all. But I think that early childhood education and just education in general are key to ultimate financial independence.
Yeah, and I agree that
And
it's
and that can, sorry to interrupt, but like that can happen later in life. Like it is not like, oh, if I didn't have that when I was a little kid, I can't get there. I mean, it's much easier, sure, if it starts young. But one of the, there are many good things about technology, but one of them is there's a lot of opportunity to get educated now, even without being in school. And I mean, just a little anecdote, and I don't want to do a plug, so I won't say the name of it. But I was going to Holland for work recently. We were invited to participate in a program in the Netherlands around food loss and waste and solutions to that. And I wanted to learn a little Dutch before I went, just so I could at least be polite and say hello and ask for a drink of water and whatever. And so I downloaded one of these, apps that is a language app. And, in a week I had like learned the basics and it was amazing. So I think that, I just when I promote sort of education, I think you can get the misnomer. It's like, oh, you must go to college and you must do this and you must do that. No, there's lots of ways to learn, and just being like always wanting to learn is the thing that's going to get you to the next place financially, I think.
yeah, and I agree that that educate unfortunately it's not a skill taught in school, but if you have that education uh, with your parents and you have good examples out there, or do it yourself. Start looking at programs because there's plenty of programs out there, whether they're free or low cost. And like you say, you don't have to go and get a whole MBA or something, but
Yeah.
just learn some basics.
And seek out people who are inspiring to you. I think that's the other thing. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I had great parents and they were very supportive about education. So it's not like that wasn't like an issue. But I also had a couple of people, mentors in grade school and high school and college and a couple of jobs I had who really, showed me, sort of showed me different skills that later led to, other successes. Um, but even then, I mean, if you were talking about finance, my mother is 87 now, and I'm starting to help her kind of take care of, some things that she's not able to take care of anymore. And we were laughing. I was visiting her last week and I was saying, the good news about being a child of war, I mean, she grew up in in Europe and during the Second World War, and came to this country in her when she was 11. And she's just always been really, really frugal, even 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 after, like working, and my dad had a great job, and they wanted for nothing. But that sort of reflex of frugality is something that totally she passed on to me. And my business partner, similarly, the reflex of frugality is something that she has as well. And we always think like that's actually really great for building a business, because you're just more careful. You're not just like, oh, I got $1 million. I'm gonna, spend it on one person or one idea, or one part of my idea. So there are lots of ways that becoming financially independent can come to you, I guess. And frugality would be one of them.
Agreed. And if you had one message to give to women listening today about owning their own independence, what would it be?
Don't let anyone put you down. That's the first one, maybe. Or don't, just believe, really believe that you can do it. I think, even if you don't know how, like it is possible. Everyone, it's not like it's not like something you're born with. It's something you have to learn. And I think that just remembering that is that, you can learn anything. And maybe you're not, and I don't, whether that's learning how to balance a checkbook or learning how to play the violin, like you can learn how to do it. On the violin side, you may not be a great violinist, but you're going to be able to, if you practice over and over, play enough to give yourself the pleasure of playing music. Balancing a checkbook, you need basic math skills, and you can learn those even if you didn't learn them as a kid. Sure, your mind is less plastic or whatever as an older person, but you have more wisdom as an older person. So I would say just like never sell yourself short of being able to learn something. Um, and then, find someone who you trust to teach you those things. I don't think that's probably like a traditional response, like go to business school or do whatever, but so much of it has to do with self-confidence and believing you can do it. And I think that, unfortunately, we live in a society where women are still not considered to be, the most intelligent if you had to choose between a male and a female. Certainly in certain arenas, that's not true, but there are a lot of arenas where it is, and business is still one of them, whether it's spoken or unspoken. And certainly our current political situation is not encouraging, women in very many ways. So yeah, believing in yourself, getting educated, I think those are first and foremost, and knowing how to balance your checkbook, keeping yourself afloat in the most essential ways, I think is really important.
So, thank you so much for joining us today, and a huge thank you to Anna Hammond for sharing her wisdom and energy with us. If you found value in this conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the Empowered Money Girl with your friends. The more we spread these stories, the more women we can empower to live boldly, both financially and in every part of life. Until next time, keep thriving, and remember, your journey to empowerment starts with you.